for your time this morning. I mean, it's quite a task Pravin Gordhan has ahead of him. And I suppose the question would be, where do you begin and how far down or deep do you actually go? Can you actually go in such a cleanup?
I think what we are seeing at Transnet is sad, tragic and regrettable. Unfortunately, it is just one of a string of state capture projects that have been unfolding certainly in the last 10 years. And the sad thing is that at the time that we are talking about municipalities sharing just one fire truck, that more than 90% of the students at Fort Hare University are totally dependent on NSFAS, not just for tuition and accommodation, but for their livelihood. At the time that we have just launched sanitation appropriate for education to eliminate latrine toilets in our schools. In one province, there's more than 100 of these. When 5.9 young people, able-bodied, a lot of them graduates, that could go to school or could work, don't have a job. 10 million young people, 35 years and younger, are not in education, in employment or training. We are wasting almost 100 billion a year, every year, in this project of state capture. In Transnet alone, with one contract, where we ordered 1,064 locomotives outside of the country, when we have a company like Union Carriage here in Brakpan that made all the trains during the apartheid era, not a single one was ordered by Transnet locally, when it is the policy of this government to talk about re-industrialization, about localization, beneficiation, and the creation of black industrialists. And yet, here's one contract that has been inflated by 16 billion, 7 billion of which has been paid to the Gupta company, even before the first locomotive is delivered.
So, while we can see the signs and the start of a cleanup, like you say, the question is, how do we get all of that money back? Do we ever get that back? And do we ever get enough of it back to make good on all of these injustices that have resulted, or that where this money could have been used? So a cleanup, you'd imagine, would hope to get some of that money back. Can we ever?
I think the president has been very clear and explicit on this matter to say, moving forward with this new dawn, this is a country of laws, not of men. Unfortunately, the long arm of the law takes time, and people are impatient and restless, and rightfully so. But every single solitary one of the executives implicated in Transnet must wear orange overalls in the other Sun City. Exactly the same with the politicians that have been aiding and abetting the state capture project. What the former public protector, Thuli Madonsela, did in 6 weeks before she left office was to look at the state of capture and produce a report only on Eskom. And we knew that the people that were central and germane to this were actually promoted from Transnet in the name of the CEO and the former CFO. I think whilst we have a artificially manufactured shortage of coal so that we can pay more money to the Guptas, the next crisis after the electricity crisis is going to be water, because every single solitary one of our institutions have been hollowed out, where the people who know what they are doing have been gotten rid of. Lastly, the sad thing is that almost all the state-owned enterprises are trading recklessly because their liabilities are higher than their assets.
Well, Pravin Gordhan also, Bonang, raising the question, saying the conduct of auditors, again, has been put in the spotlight when it comes. We can't just look at the people who stole money. I mean, that's what they did, is stole money. But those who saw this happening and did nothing about it.
I think what breaks South Africa's heart is when you take your faith and you put it in the hands of the police, and then you learn that the police themselves are the ones that have been involved in cash-in transits. When the South Africans take their fate and put it in the hands of the politicians, and then you find that it's an ANC office bearer who's been involved in cash-in transit. For us as business, what breaks our heart is that whilst we're getting our loins in anticipation to root out and defeat state capture, corruption and industrial scale looting, it's sad to find that amongst our very own in the private sector, the people that have also been implicated are themselves business. But even more tragically, we are supposed to trust the final word of the auditors. Emphasis of matter, whether or not it's a clean audit. Now it's the auditors themselves, KPMG. So it's no accident that there's Business Leadership South Africa representing 86 CEOs of major companies. When we signed an anti-corruption oath called the Integrity Pledge, the first company we fired, suspended, was not a public sector entity, but KPMG.
So Pravin Gordhan saying then, just before I let you go, Bonang, that he's saying that firms that colluded in state capture should be shamed. You support that call?
Not only shamed, they must go to jail as well. Yeah. I think it's not helpful for us to say, you know what, we need to go back to 1652 when Jan van Riebeeck landed to trace the genesis of corruption. It's not helpful to say, but the apartheid government itself was corrupt. If you are a manager, you've got a company to run, the one that you catch red-handed stealing at that time, you deal with that, and then you go back and say, how far has this been going? So we must deal with the 10-year state capture project that has robbed South Africans of their livelihood. And then we go back to the people during the bread cable scandal. And then we can go back to what happened in 2007 when we went to Polokwane. But I think systematically, chronologically, methodically, with an approach, we must root out this scourge. Africa can be known as a corrupt continent.
There can be no limit to how far back we can go. Thank you very much for your time, Bonang Mohale. They're just looking at the cleanup of state-owned entities and what Pravin Gordhan and his team have ahead of them. Well.